Not, that's fine.
I don't have to have my face on the screen.
That's fine with me as long as it's okay with you.
Yeah, fine with me. My other alternative is take my iPad and go back and somewhere else. Seems like it's better when we don't have as much multiple things on Wi-Fi at the same time.
Yeah, here that's true. Hey, Carroll.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right. Thanks,
Hey, Carroll.
There's I got Irv in my office here.
I was going to say, who's that voice I hear?
How are you?
I'm good.
Good deal.
Oh, so you can hear Irv. Okay, good. So he can participate in everything. I know there's a couple people who won't be joining us. So
Elmer's usually on, but she had to go to Greenville. She's not.
yeah, Eleanor can't be here, and I feel like somebody else said as well. So it might be a smaller class, but we're getting.
We got the quality.
Okay.
That's right. That's right. We got the quality people.
Right.
But I feel like lectionary class was real light this week too. So I don't know if people might be especially busy or something, or maybe they're getting tired of Zoom classes. Who knows?
Getting ready to leave. We're leaving Sunday. So
That's right. Y'all are headed
we're
to
heading to New Orleans. Hopefully things will be good down there.
Well, I'm sure it'll be nice to be with everybody.
It will be. It will. We hadn't seen one set of kids since Mardi Gras. So there we go.
Oh my goodness. There's Margaret and Sandra. Hello, Sandra, you're muted. I don't know if you're talking.
Okay,
Hey,
now I'm
Margaret.
unmuted. Good morning again.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I don't have my book because I'm in Atlanta and forgot to bring it. But I realized I had time to watch the class. So,
Okay, good.
yeah.
That's okay. I'm sure you can, if you remember something you want to chime in with, feel free.
I really
But
I loved the last chapter. I thought it was really good.
Mhm.
Oh,
Me too.
And
I've got Irv in my office with me. So he's over here in the corner with his mask on. So he's gonna chime in from over there if he wants to.
I'm tied up too, so I can't move. So.
That's all right. You can't get any closer to me. Hello, Laura. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and open us with prayer because it's 10, and I just want us to stay within our time frame. So the Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Also with you.
Let's let Mr. Leach here get on. Okay. All right. Well, let us pray. O God, our heavenly Father, you have blessed us and given us dominion over all the earth. Increase our reverence before the mystery of life and give us new insight into your purposes for the human race, new wisdom and determination in making provision for its future in accordance with your will, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So that's a prayer called For the Future of the Human Race from our prayer book on page 828. And I thought it lined up pretty well with kind of where we end in this book, give us new wisdom and determination in making provisions for the future. I thought that was a fitting tie-in. So I hope that everyone else felt the same way. So what we're going to do today is look over chapter 5. Obviously, the way that we have been looking at chapters, as well as just kind of get your overall opinions on how this book played out and what N.T. Wright had to say. This is just one chapter. It's kind of short. So if we get to a place where we really don't have anything else to share, we might end a little bit early. I'm not sure. I just don't want us to feel like we have to draw this out any longer than we have to. I mean, I think we can go the entire hour, but we'll see where it goes from there, right? I just want to leave that open for us. So just real quickly, we did talk a little bit about Romans chapter 8 at the end of last week. I thought that N.T. Wright kind of tied that idea back into this chapter well, the idea that all good things are working through God. So I hope that y'all were able to see that, and we'll talk about that a little bit more toward the end of the chapter. But I just wanted to start off kind of where we had left things at the end of last week and bring us back to that place where N.T. Wright was not necessarily giving us a new interpretation of scripture, which he freely said. He said, I didn't come up with this, but I want to bring that to the front, he was saying, and said that all good things happen through God, whether this is through, an Episcopal church or anything, anything. It doesn't matter if it's a mosque and they're trying to do the right thing, working forward with the pandemic or anything else. God is influencing all of these right decisions. So let's just jump right in to chapter 5, and I want to open it up to any one of y'all first. And for those of you who just joined us, I just want to let you know that I've got Irv in my office here. He's sitting in the corner with his mask on. He was here for a meeting and wanted to join us, and you might hear his voice. It's not the voice of God. It's the voice of Irv. Though he could be influenced by God, if he's given us some wise insight, right?
Right.
So yeah, I just want to open it up to you. Where do you want to go? Where do you want to begin with chapter 5?
I think the main thing in the beginning on page 53 is that we have to admit that we don't have easy answers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we don't.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, exactly. And I love how he like takes us back to that place of lament.
Yeah.
And also takes us back to the Lord's Prayer,
Mhm.
but then goes directly into what you're talking about, Carroll, and saying that we know we need to lament. We know that, we forgive our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us, but at the same time, that doesn't necessarily make anything easier.
Right.
I also found it really, I love where he went here on page 53 also about kind of turning the idea of what is strong on its head in a way, where he says, be strong like Jesus who wept at the grave of his friend. I loved that. That really felt really real to me right now. Also, I mean, just thinking about, where some of my family are in Arkansas, when the pandemic seemingly gets closer than it has been for me, other people have already experienced this, with maybe having family and friends I've had family and friends that have gotten COVID-19, but nobody that it's affected in this way yet, right? And so realizing that it's okay to recognize that and say, you know what, it's tragic, it's sad, it's scary, and that's strong. That's being strong.
How is your family, Murdock?
Not everyone. A lot of my stepmother's siblings have gathered in Little Rock, and they're all with their mom. The ones that are there, they've just decided to go in there and stay there. And she's, I don't expect my grandmother Beverly to make it possibly through today.
Oh gosh.
She apparently she's kind of stopped responding. She's still alive. She's not on oxygen. She's still alive in the sense that naturally she's still breathing. The last time they tried to put her on oxygen, she wasn't responding, but she responded to that by taking it off. She is with hospice. Hospice has come, which was, I thought about that a lot reading this chapter. He talks about hospice. They've come. I think her regular nurses have left. And so, yeah, she's kind of moving into that next stage. We've got a family text message feed. It's the 21st century. That's how we're communicating. And it's okay. I think everybody's okay with it.
How old is she?
Well, that's a good thing.
Yes. Exactly. It is a good thing. Yeah, she's 91, I keep saying, but she might be 92.
Oh, you're in our prayers, you and your family.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's important. It is very important. Well, I loved just going forward from 53 to 54, where he incorporates, he does a really good job of picking other authors to quote. So he brings forward T.S. Eliot.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, it said to my soul, be still and let the dark come upon you. This prayer, or this, it is a prayer, but poem, written apparently when the bombing of London was taking place. I think about how we say, like, this is an unprecedented event in my lifetime, right? I've never, 9/11, obviously I was 20. I experienced that, but thinking about people who have experienced things like T.S. Eliot did, and he's sitting here thinking about his faith and those kinds of things, really put this pandemic and this situation for me into a different light, thinking that we've got to still be strong in those ways, weeping by the grave of our friends, but strong in our faith at the same time, and recognizing that this isn't normal, but it's also not unprecedented. And in the end, even if we don't all make it through, some people are. I don't know. I feel like T.S. Eliot's musings here, as he says, put that in a different light for me. The dark which shall be the darkness of God. I don't know.
Right.
Very interesting.
I like near the middle, but faith, hope, love are all in the waiting. It seems like as children of God, we are asked to wait a lot. And sometimes that's hard, and we need to realize that we're going to have ignorance and we not going to know everything. And we can't just jump at the easy answers and the easy solutions.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Well, when he moves into this idea about talking about God, and the thing that really struck me the most was when he quotes Genesis, and it says it grieved him to his heart, talking about God, and recognizing, as this paragraph opens with, many things after all actually bring grief to God. So this
Are you
on page 56, if I didn't say, excuse me. This brings forward those ideas that you hear quite a bit in Hebrew scripture, and bringing human elements to God, anthropomorphic descriptions of God. Think about Moses in the burning bush, when God walks past and Moses peeks through the crack and sees God's back. These are ways, whether you want to believe them literally or figuratively, to understand how God works in the world, right? The hand of God. You think about in Isaiah, when God is sitting on a throne. When you use those kinds of descriptions, that literally means God is sitting on a throne, right? These are the descriptions that are used. And that the same way, when you say that something grieves God, then that means that God has the same kind of emotional capacity that we do. If God experiences grief, then it's the same way we experience grief. And and those are descriptions. I think, my understanding of God, of course, is, or for me at least, is that it's bigger than what I can comprehend. And often when I think about these human elements described to God, I think that people who did that had the same idea, but they want to be able to bring forth ideas that we can all understand. So saying that the coronavirus grieves God puts it basically, for me at least, in the level of the incarnation, knowing that Jesus can understand the same emotions we do, so does God the Father, or God in the heavens, however you want to describe it. So for me, that's very relief. It brings relief, knowing that this isn't something that God approves of, basically. Even though we know, for example, I know my grandmother's going to die. I grieve that. I don't approve of it. I don't want her to, but I still have to accept it, and not necessarily move forward and just forget about it, but grieve. But at the same time, know that I wish she wouldn't. So when I hear that things grieve God, it makes me think that God doesn't want this happening in the world necessarily, but it is happening. And God is grieving the same way we are. So that's how I understand that. And I wondered if that sparked any thoughts for you. Many things, after all, actually bring grief to God.
Murdock,
Yes, ma'am.
I think God grieves, but I also think that his grief motivates him to action. And I think that's what we are supposed to do at the right time. I don't think we're to, I think we do need to grieve. I'm not saying move on immediately, but just like things that grieve us, seeing children who have been physically harmed, who've been physically abused, can motivate some people to try to do something about that. And so I think I think God grieves, and I think we grieve, and eventually, hopefully, the grief will move us to some action, if only prayer.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. And he hits on that earlier in the book, and then also in this chapter too, and he talks about like the Christian response throughout history. I think that was grief driven in the way that you're talking about it, Lawson. If there's a plague, when there was a plague in the 5th century, they talk about this emperor saying, these Christians are responding differently than we have in the past. Often I'm skeptical of those responses or like apologetics, but I think it's great to think about, and I agree with you. The grief often moves us to act. I think about when my mother's mother died, and she was grieving in such a way that she couldn't handle it, right? And I was younger, but I was grieving also, and I was grieving for my mom, and so I kind of stepped in and helped with the funeral arrangements, right? Just using myself as an example, but that was a call to action in a way, where right now we've talked about, what was the great phrase that N.T. Wright used? Active participation. And sometimes that's prayer, that's a call to action, or putting on your mask is a call to action. I think these are things that are all tied together. I also really love just sticking with this little section where he says that evil is an intruder in God's creation. I love that. I love N.T. Wright's insistence that basically against, to use a theological term like Marcionism, that like that there isn't a world of evil in a sense and a world of good. That's like a dualistic threat to basically our belief system, even though he says that in the modern world we kind of live in that way anyway. But he insists that evil is not part of God's plan. But at the same time, he doesn't give evil the same elevation. There is no God's plan and evil plan. Evil's intruding in God's plan. God's plan is the only one that exists. Evil is in there. We don't know why, but we have to accept it. N.T. Wright says, but we can work against it. So I really loved that.
So that seems to me a little bit, I've been thinking about this while we've been talking.
Here's Irv over here. I don't know if y'all can hear him. Speak up a little bit, Irv.
So I feel like God's plan is that we're always trying to move towards love, a state of love, and all of that. And evil is the opposite of that. But God gave us the power of love, the ability to love. He also gave us the ability or requirement that we have to make choices. And evil would be a choice that some of us make.
Yeah.
All of us make it sometime or another. I don't know. But God's plan is to move towards love. And I think the natural state of things, I do believe, is that nature is always taking us in that direction. We make choices that go against that. So when we talk about evil being an intruder, that's because we've chosen it, I think, as opposed to that being some cosmic force, maybe.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I don't know if y'all could hear Irv, but go ahead, Laura. Please, Laura.
I would say going along with that, if we go back to the last paragraph, page 55, how he talks about, the vocation, God's purpose for humans is to reflect his purpose in the world. And when we sinned, he didn't cancel that. And that goes along with evil and sin. I mean, God still expects that, even though there's evil and there's sin, that our purpose reflect his purpose in the world.
Exactly. And that also goes back to, I don't think that this is what I'm about to say is necessarily some kind of new way to view scripture. I think it's something that has been in the purview always and makes little different bumps or up and down, but our reflection of God's purpose is us being made in the image of God, in a sense, and God said it was good. God's purpose is good. God's purpose is love. God's purpose is not evil, right? Like all these things are interchangeable. I think often for me, evil and sin can be interchangeable words. People say evil and you think of these great big things, right? But evil is talking bad about your friend behind their back. That's an evil deed. It's just not, a horrendous deed, but it's still bad. It's still a sinful deed. So I like to think about those two words being the same. So you're right. God's purpose in the world is good, are good things. And I love the way N.T. Wright makes this very accessible. I can't remember who said that the other day. Maybe it was Lawson. You were talking about N.T. Wright's writing, and he kind of has these little quibs that are very memorable. I guess that's why he's a bishop. I don't know. So yes, I love where we're going with this. The next move he makes is basically what is the call of the church, and this is a good, and more good news, I think. I love just to get us started, maybe y'all have some comments on this, where he reflects on the resurrection and basically what is happening at the time of the resurrection, and he kind of sums it up with these three things: tears, locked doors, and doubt. And then he compares that to where we are in the world today, and I was like, man, that is really good. Like that is I got to remember that. That is so true. And then he gives kind of each reason, tears because of what's happening in the world. Maybe we have a sick family member, locked doors because we're scared of the person in the street who's going to give us the pandemic or give us the virus. And then doubt about the future, perhaps, or doubt about where we are in the world right now. So I loved that. That really spoke to me. Unless anyone wants to say something more about that, the next thing I wanted to talk about, please do, Lawson, please.
Of course, in the very next paragraph, she was to go and tell the disciples who were in hiding that he was alive and that he was now, capital N-O-W, to be enthroned as the Lord of the world. So many of us think that he is not the Lord of the world now because evil still exists now, because heaven has not come to earth now. But the Gospel of John really says this too, is that once Jesus ascended, he is now the Lord of the world. And it is one of those paradoxes where something is true now, but not completely true. It's now, but not yet.
Yeah, and N.T. Wright insists on that throughout this book about the kingdom of God being now. Lawson, exactly what you're talking about. He is very insistent on that. So I really appreciate you recognizing that and bringing it forward. And I struggle with that concept myself. So I don't know if anyone else, I have to remind myself of that, so I don't know if anyone else ever does also. You're kind of like, yeah, we're waiting on the coming. We're talking about Advent. The day of the Lord is going to come soon, right? Well, it's come once and it's going to come again. So what did you say at the very end? Now, but not yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Which is also, about active participation. I feel like at the same time, as being kingdom people, we have to work now, but we also have to be patient. I feel like N.T. Wright is saying that. Are you going to say something, Laura?
Well, I was just going to say on the next page, going on with the tears and fear and doubt, more than halfway down the page, he says, if the earliest disciples found Jesus coming to meet them in their tears, fears, and doubt, perhaps we can too. I like that statement. That, it's okay to have the tears and fears and doubt, but we have to look for Jesus in it, not get too isolated.
And I feel like getting too isolated, like N.T. Wright says, we have to be strong and weep at the grave of our friends. We have to meet Jesus in the tears and the fears and the doubt. But if we get too isolated, I feel like we talked about this before, or we get too caught up in all the fears and doubts, then we're almost like letting evil creep into our lives at the same time. I feel like there's a very fine line to where we are existing in this now and have to do what we have to do, but at the same time, let Jesus come in and experience that joy. We're about to get to where he's talking about joy a little bit. We can't lose that entirely, right? It's almost the opposite of what we need to be doing. Well, I was just kind of shocked, and he says that this letter of Luther made its way on the internet. I don't know how you're supposed to say that. I guess I missed it. I didn't see it. But I read this letter of Martin Luther's on page 63, or this excerpt, and was just kind of floored with how relevant it is to our situation now. And also the language that he uses, that Martin Luther uses, is funny. He says, I guess Martin Luther was known for a down-to-earth wisdom and practical piety. And this seems very full of all those things. The enemy has sent poison and deadly dung among us. I mean, that is so, yeah, that's just down to the nitty gritty. And I feel like it's very, very much where we are today.
If God wishes to take me, he will be able to find me.
Yes. I found that to be very, that little line, very stark, but also, you know, I feel that all the time. I felt that before the pandemic also. You know, that kind of thing, like you've got to get right with your Lord. You know, and if you are, then, you know, see what happens, or, you know, and I really loved that. So I'm not sure if that letter struck anybody else as quite as much as it did me, but you know, basically saying and recognizing that, and this is going along with N.T. Wright's kind of path of the Christian response throughout history, and how Christians have jumped in to do different things and have helped in different ways. But at the same time, then he says, hey, and then we've got Martin Luther. I'll get right to you, Sandra. That Martin Luther is reminding people even 500 years ago that sometimes you can get in the way. If you're trying to do the right thing, you can get in the way. And sometimes you've got to take a step back and say, someone else knows how to do this better than me. So I also found that to be very helpful. And what were you going to say, Sandra?
I was just going to say, you know, the last line of this excerpt from him, it says, I shall avoid neither person nor place, but feel free to visit and to help him. And I think it is so sad when we think of all the people who have passed away from this virus that have done it alone because they were not allowed to have visitors or for anyone to be there. I mean, how wonderful to have some spiritual attendance when you're leaving this world. And for so many people, that has not happened. They've literally died alone in a room by themselves. And I find that to be very bad, very sad, not bad, but sad that, that's happened to so many people, and especially elderly people.
That needed somebody to hold their hand.
You know.
It is very heartbreaking. And, you know, I can say that we've been very fortunate in a sense here within our immediate community here at Church of the Good Shepherd, where we haven't been put in that quandary just yet, or hopefully never will. I hope that we can get through this and never have to worry about that. But our families have been there, many of us, and our friends. So I'm with you, Sandra. It's heartbreaking. And on the next page, N.T. Wright insists that, you know, clergy should be allowed to attend the sick and dying. Once again, I haven't really been put in that quandary yet, so I don't know quite the extent of what we're allowed to do during this pandemic at the nearest hospital. If I remember correctly, when somebody was getting a hip replacement and we couldn't go visit them, I don't think, for those reasons, because of COVID-19. So that makes me think that that if there was a situation, there would be some arguing, or, you know, some, I don't really know who would win. N.T. Wright says we've given all the power basically to the secular authorities, and I don't disagree with them. That's, you know, but that's the world we live in, and he recognizes that and says, you know, that is the world we live in. Oh, please go ahead.
Sandra, also on top of that dying alone, and then the family members, they can't even plan a funeral, that they can't gather together to mourn, and there's no closure anywhere. So, you know, that the funeral, that the memorial service would be 6 months from now, or that just, that to me is as sad as the dying alone, that the family
You're
members and the mourners are, they're really alone. They're alone. Everyone's alone right now.
You know, that's true, Carol. You know,
Yeah,
understand
we,
the need to protect people. I truly understand that. And I think in so many instances, that's what they're trying to do is protect the rest of society. But there's still such a degree of sadness, like Carol said, to have even no closure to the death of a dear family members, you know.
You know, just
very much.
recognizing that truth. In Georgia, the first big spike we had was in South Georgia, caused by a funeral. Just
Exactly. Exactly.
I think 56 people got, I can't remember the number really, but it was not just one.
Exactly.
Huge group of people got it.
Right.
Um,
Well, we had that right here. We had that in Cashers with a revival that was held. And then like 17 people suddenly showed up, you know.
mhm,
So
mhm.
there has to be a degree of sanity in the insanity.
Well, you,
Good way
yes,
to express
every-
it.
everything everybody's saying. I heard another voice a minute ago.
Murdock, at the bottom of 63, where he's talking about the quote from Luther, he says, Luther clearly believed that the normal course of action was for a Christian to stay and help rather than run away when a plague strikes a district. In the early 19th century in Mobile, when there was an epidemic of yellow fever, there was a group called the Can't Get Away Club. And in that case, it was men who sent their wives and children out of the city, you know, to higher elevations and that sort of thing, but stayed to, you know, tend to the sick, bury the dead. And so that's a more modern example of the heroes and heroines that we talk about today. And I think sometimes we talk about too glibly, you know, that, my gosh, they are putting their lives at risk, they're sacrificing their families and everything, and they just can't be given enough praise.
No, I think you're exactly right. And, you know, I think that remembering, as N.T. Wright does, the history of different Christian groups to step in times when other people wouldn't, it is our natural, for many people's response. But I think part of what he gets at, you know, he does do these things that we hear a lot of people do. Honestly, he'll say something and then, like, in a parenthetical, he'll say, you know, socially distanced, of course. You know, we're programmed right now to, I think rightfully so, follow a lot of the protocols. And then, as he points out, a lot of things have been placed into different sectors where, you know, in the past, there wasn't maybe an infrastructure that the church filled that infrastructure. And he points out that some of that infrastructure has left the church's hands, whether that's for the good or the bad. So I think, you know, that's the world we live in right now. But I love that story. I also love the story of the Sisters of St. Mary's, if y'all remember, in Memphis, who did a similar thing. So we got to keep those stories in our hearts, because you never know. I mean, you never know when we're going to be called upon to do that ourselves.
I like this.
Here's Herb.
This line is just under what was just read. The generous, one-dimensional desire to be a hero, to do the right thing, needs to be well rounded out with equally generous willingness to restrain apparent heroism when it might bring itself disaster.
Yeah, on page 64.
Yeah.
At the
right.
very end of the first paragraph. Yeah. Yeah, you know, and I think that's kind of what we were talking about a little bit with what Luther was recognizing. You know, it's basically kind of where can we do things that are going to help and be and not get in the way. I think I have to remember that myself. Well, I also was struck if if anybody else wants to chime in, please do. But I also was going to look at this poem, Easter 2020. I don't know if anybody read that. Herb's stepping out for a sec here. That's on page 67. And boy, that took me back to Easter 2020 myself. I don't know how y'all felt about Easter 2020, but part of me, I kept having to remind myself, it is Easter, because at that point, I don't know if I hadn't figured out how to do online worship with people that well, and I felt very much alone, with Mary Catherine, obviously, but we were in Swanee still. And where is Jesus in on this strange day? At this point, this is where N.T. Wright is starting to look and discuss locked churches, kind of basically hitting on some kind of controversial political things. Our church is supposed to be locked. Are they supposed to be open? What does the church stand like, or what does the church represent? Is that where our heart is in worship, or can we go out into the world and recognize Jesus is outside of the church doors? For me, that's a hard question. I recognize that we can worship anywhere, obviously, and that Christ is all around us at all times. But where is my heart in worship mostly? Well, being, Episcopalian and growing up in that worship style and those things. So for me, I'm most comfortable in, a liturgy in the church. And so figuring out how to take myself outside of that has been difficult, but I've been very thankful to be at Church of the Good Shepherd, where we've been worshiping together most of this time.
Well,
So I
but
was
in
curious
the early
how y'all
part,
felt about that.
in the early part of this pandemic, we could have a service online and follow it, and that was good. It sort of connected us, but there was no Eucharist. And that was a big hole in the service for Easter, was to watch it online, but no Eucharist. So it was wonderful when we could start coming into church and have it really. But it was good. We kept our church doors open all the time. So anyone who felt the need for a little close touch of God could walk in and enjoy. That was good.
Mm-hmm.
Just a weird world we live in.
Mm-hmm.
He also goes on to say, in this time of pandemic, everything was locked down. Churches, you couldn't go to church, you couldn't do anything, but you could go, shopping, and you could go to the liquor store, and but you couldn't go to church.
Yep.
I think that to me, one of the things that you and Rob did was to leave the church open and lit 24/7. I thought that was, even if you're passing by, which I have done a couple of times about midnight, you see that church with the lights on, and you think, that's so inviting.
It's a special thing that we've been able to do. Yeah, and N.T. Wright, I think, brings up the things, kind of the controversial aspects of this in a way that I relate to. Having grocery stores and liquor stores and all these things open is necessary, and I believe that. But I also, being a priest in the church, feel the same way about churches. But
Exactly.
he brings up a good point that since he says something about people view that some of us who want churches to be open, that we're just hanging on to something archaic or blah blah blah, and they don't understand. I at least appreciate that N.T. Wright brings forth that idea that we do believe churches are vital, but at the same time recognizes, he's a smart guy, that's not the universal norm anymore. And then how do we navigate that and be a part of society, and not be not hold a 3-day, what were you bringing up, Sandra? The 3-day rally. What do they call it? Yeah. Oh, where all the people in Cashers got sick.
Revival.
Revival. Thank you. Goodness gracious, I couldn't remember what that was called. That was irresponsible. And for me,
Yeah,
that doesn't
I agree.
represent the good side of this argument about churches being open. Having a 3-day revival with 150 people in a small space is not the responsible end of that argument. But saying, hey, we need to be able to have 20 people in this church, and we can do it time and time again, and clean and things in between, is, in my opinion, a responsible argument. It's starting to get a little bit scarier with like spikes, and we have to keep that in mind. So for me, it's hard not to argue that the church itself, the physical building, I know that the church exists outside the physical building. We're the church here right now, but that longing to be in that space is real. So it's a real. Lawson, do you want to say something?
Did y'all, and I don't know if y'all mentioned this already, did y'all hear the Supreme Court ruling this morning?
No,
They said that churches could not be held to a standard than other groups in the community. For instance, and this went, I'm talking about the Supreme Court of the United States. The state Supreme Court said that the governor could tell churches they could not open or whatever. And the Supreme Court of the United States said churches have to be held to the same standards that other groups. So if only 20 people could be in a restaurant of a certain number of square feet, then 20 people must be allowed in the church with the same number of square footage. So they were saying the churches could not be held to a stricter standard than other groups in the society.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. And, luckily, or not luckily, but in a sense, obviously we have to adhere to the laws of the state.
Sure.
But then at the same time, we have our bishop who can give us other directions and say, that's what they're saying, but I feel we need to do this in a way. So, and I feel like the Episcopal Church has been pretty responsible. And I feel like that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes hard to swallow, but a good thing. Go ahead, Sandra.
One of the things I thought was the greatest about this whole chapter was when he said he heard someone say on television that you'll be safe in the church because the devil can't get in there. And he said, I wanted to you, lady, I'm a bishop. The devil knows his way in there as well as anybody else.
Yeah.
It's that kind of
Yeah, I love
superstition that lends people to say, well, I can't go to church because, or I can't go here, or I can't go there. But by the way, I've got to go to the mall this weekend to get presents.
You don't have to.
In the same vein, I loved his response on page 68, which is a response to that prayer, Easter 2020. And he says, this is the very end of that top paragraph. He says, part of the answer to the question, where is God in this pandemic, must be out there on the front lines, suffering and dying to bring healing and hope. So I feel like this is that continuation of that idea that all the good in the world, that work that happens, is influenced by God in a way. Whether or not the frontline worker is the believer, God is still at work in that work. And when we hear about nurses and doctors that get the virus and pass away, that's horrible. But we know that they are working to help others, and that's bringing healing and hope. So it's a difficult paradox. He uses that word a few times in this chapter. Maybe it's a dichotomy. I don't know any of those things, but it's tough. It's tough to think about, but it's also hopeful, I think. Well, we're moving into the very last few pages, and I was struck. I loved this. That joy signifies something you can hear. And this is where we're getting into kind of that difficult nature. I think that Sandra and some others were bringing up about, being separated from the Eucharist, being separated from that joy. For me, being separated from music has been tough. But what he reminds us, I love this. This is one of the things I love about N.T. Wright. He is a historian, and he reminds us about the world that Paul lived in and how there were parades and religious activity happening in the streets, very different than the world that we live in, where it's behind closed doors. They talk about when we talk about Paul and how he preached the gospel. There is a movement within historians that believe that Paul, a lot of times people say he participated in these outdoor philosophical debates, and some people believe that, and that's okay. That really sits with what N.T. Wright is talking about. At the same time, if we think Paul was a leather worker or a tent maker, which some people think he would invite people into his open work area and be doing the things that he did and preaching the gospel at the same time. So if Carroll was looking to buy a tent and she comes to my place and he's making it, he's like, well, have you heard the good news of Jesus Christ? It's almost like this idea that, Paul was at work in the world giving the gospel at the same time, which I think is beautiful. And N.T. Wright reminds us that all that happened while these other things were happening all around them. And I think that's tough. It's tough for me. I'm not the best evangelist in the sense of going out into the world and bringing people in. I do my best. I try, but, I am of this world. Like I've already admitted that, I miss the church building. I miss having it packed. I don't want to have it packed because I want to be safe. But, he reminds us that bringing that joy, the joy of Christ out into the world is a joyful noise. And we can bring it forward. And we're going to do that with our caroling. That's going to be really cool. And so that kind of falls into that argument that we're going to do that. Someone might drive by and see it. They might stop. So anyway, I loved when he brought that forward, that joy, signifies something you can hear. A wonderful sentiment. But I loved he also put a parenthetical in there with proper social distancing. So I think that's another thing that he brought forward that I just loved. I found myself really loving the end of this book. I really did.
Well, I especially like that too, that he did kind of say where we need to go from here. And he was talking about being proactive and that the church needs to take apart the Christian leaders in thinking, where are we going to go from here, and coming up with, facing the challenges and trying to make things better. Because again, during this time, we have seen how many broken systems there are. And it's saying we need wise Christian leaders to help step in. Otherwise, things are just going to go back to the way they were.
Yeah. Thank you, Laura, for moving us in the right direction. So do y'all think that he gave us, he doesn't give us an answer, but he gives us an idea. Do you think that
I think
it's
his
something
ending
we can
in
do?
Psalm 43 was a pretty good way to end the chapter. Hope in God, for I shall again praise him, my help and my God.
Yes, ma'am. You are right. I really appreciated what you were talking about, Laura, and that church leaders have got to work with secular leaders. He says stuff like people are going to capitalize on the broken economy, basically. And we might have already seen some of that. How much money has Jeff Bezos made in the last 7 months? But he also gives us that idea that we can't stay here. He says that almost specifically. We can't stay on Zoom. forever. I mean, we can incorporate Zoom. He recognizes that and said, we've learned new ways to do things, but we can't stay here. And I thought this little quote, this is about moving forward, was a tough one to swallow. And it's that we have this glimpsing of what we ought to be, but then we struggle with the way that things actually are. You know, are things just going to go back? Or can we, which I think Laura was bringing up, as church leaders, leaders in our community, say that we've recognized things are broken, how can we fix them? Or are people just going to jump back out and go, man, I can't wait to get to Ugly Dog when it's at full capacity? It's hard, because I think part of us want to do that, but at the same time, we need to say, he brings up that some of us have been okay with isolating because we have everything we need, but what about those people in the refugee camps or in a third world country where distancing, I can't remember exactly what it says, but it basically says distancing is impossible. What are we going to do about that? I really appreciated him bringing forward those kinds of pluses and minuses of what we're going to see. But in the end, I think go ahead, Laura.
I do
Please.
see a lot of glimmer of hope in the Cashers community. I think there are many leaders and many people who are working to make things better. And the leaders in our church too, with the new vision, the different committees and things.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of hope there. And I'm very thankful for the strong leaders in our church and our community. And I really feel grateful for their vision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of good work in Cashers. I mean, when we've seen some, with money that's gone back out into the community, and that's the way it needs to be. And I also think that most of us here in Cashers have made the right decisions in the way that we are practicing this parenthetical, but being socially distanced. But at the same time, trying to still hold each other accountable and be hopeful. But I'm a little bit sometimes, I got to be honest, like not taken aback by Cashers so much, but taken aback by, in Rob's sermon the other day, he mentioned the pandemic of 1918 and how long that lasted, and how quickly even myself got frustrated during this time and said, like, can I, these 7 months have been terrible. Like, what about, what about these longer lasting struggles that we've gone through as humanity? And am I, would I hold up to those? I don't know. I'm pretty comfortable, but still frustrated. So I am, I'd love to hear if anybody wants to give their final thoughts on what N.T. Wright had to say. I really loved that Laura took us to the right place. Where do we go from here? And I think he gives us some good options.
I think he put it, he helped us put everything in a better perspective.
We got Herb here, yep. Speak up a little bit, Herb.
He helped us put everything in a better perspective, and he associated this with God, Jesus as our guidepost. Not something that we didn't already know, but he kind of brought it into instead of being a general thing, and very specifically into what we've experienced. And we've experienced some other unusual kind of relationships. I mean, the evil interloper.
Yeah, I think he does place things, like he does place it in things that we already knew. But I really appreciated N.T. Wright's openness to let us lament, and also to point out that is our tradition. And we also don't need to place blame. We need to, move forward safely and put our hope in Christ and in the resurrection. He said something that often I don't say very often, but we put a lot of this at the foot of the cross. And I believe that is a proper place to put this. for me, I'll always be influenced by Mother Julia Gata, who would say, yes, place it at the foot of the cross, but then don't forget to look to the hope of the resurrection. Because the foot of the cross isn't where we can stay. And I think that the hopefulness that N.T. Wright also gives us, I thought was appropriate. Because we are going to get past this, and this is, when he wrote this book, there was no hope of a vaccine yet. And here we are today, knowing that people have received it. That is placing a lot of our hope in science, but I feel like that's the world we live in, and that's okay. We're not against that. And the church hasn't been against that either. They've worked together for many, many centuries.
So, I'd just like to say
Well, I hope that, oh, please, Sandra. Mhm.
that, I want to thank you for bringing this book to my attention. I have enjoyed it. I, of course, knew who N.T. Wright was, but I don't think I've ever really, read anything he's written. And I like the fact that he's straightforward and this is the way it is. And I think he says the same thing at the end of the book. We have to move forward, and hope for the best, So thank you for your class.
We can't remain here.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. I really hope that this was a fun book to read and discuss. I hope for the days that we could have a class together in person with a Zoom component. I really liked having Irvin here. I wish y'all could see him. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we can move past this together. And I know that we're still making the right decisions here at Church of the Good Shepherd. And I really thank you all for being here. I just want to give a quick plug for the next class. You'll receive something via the internet, but while we're all here, we're going to do a Hebrews Bible study. And that'll begin January 7th, I believe. Don't have a time. I think it's going to be at 10 a.m. honestly. I think that
is a Thursday like we've been.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a 10 a.m. class. That's what it seems like most people want. So Hebrews, and we're going to read that with this woman, Frances Gench. I believe that y'all have read some books of hers before. It's going to be a fun study, and I'll be leading that class. And I got to tell you, I'm going to learn just as much as everybody else is, because I've only read Hebrews one time in seminary, and we're going to read it probably closer than I did as a seminarian. So I'm looking forward to that. We're going to hear the words of the writer of Hebrews. We're going to come to the conclusion that it most likely was not the Apostle Paul, but it was a follower of his. And we're going to hear what they have to tell us. It's going to be amazing. And I hope that y'all can join me.
And to that we say shalom.
So thank you. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much.
Thank you, Murdock.
I really enjoyed doing this. Yeah,
It's
I really
great.
appreciate
Thank
everybody that
you.
was part of this class.
It was a
Thank you.
good class.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you so much.
Merry Christmas.
There you go, wrap one.
Merry Christmas.
Notch on the belt here, so.
Great class, Murdock.